They called him the Untouchable, not because he couldn't be reached, but because no one dared to try. Adrian Blackthorne, the scarred billionaire who ruled Manhattan with cold precision and merciless power. I was just the pianist hired to play at his gala, nothing more than background music for the elite. But when the gunshot echoed through the ballroom and chaos erupted, I saw something in those storm-gray eyes that no one else had ever noticed. Fear, loneliness, humanity. In that split second, I didn't see the monster everyone whispered about. I saw a man who expected to die alone. So I reached for him, pulling him from death's path, not knowing that single act of compassion would bind us together in ways neither of us could escape. They say loving Adrian Blackthorne isn't just dangerous, it's deadly. But sometimes the most beautiful souls are hidden behind the most terrifying scars. Hello, my beautiful souls. Welcome back to the chapters of love. I wonder, have you ever encountered someone whose cold exterior made others keep their distance? That person everyone whispers about, fears, or misunderstands. Perhaps you're listening from your quiet space tonight, reflecting on a time when someone saw past your own walls when no one else bothered to look deeper. The truth is, we're all scarred in some way, aren't we? Some marks show on our skin, while others hide in our hearts. If you've ever had that rare, precious moment when someone looked past your defenses and truly saw you, or if you've been the one brave enough to see beyond someone else's scars, tap that like button and share your experience in the comments below. Your courage in connecting despite fear becomes inspiration for our entire community. And if this story touches your heart tonight, please subscribe to join our family of souls who believe in love's power to heal even the deepest wounds. Now, settle in as we discover how one woman's compassion cracked the armor around the most feared man in Manhattan. Adrian Blackthorne didn't enter rooms. He consumed them. The moment his polished Italian shoes crossed any threshold, conversations died, laughter evaporated, and even the bravest executives found sudden interest in their champagne glasses. It wasn't just his wealth that commanded such fear. After all, Manhattan was crawling with billionaires. It was something far more primal, the predatory stillness in his storm-gray eyes, the cruel set of his jaw, and most of all, the scars. Oh, scars. They traced the left side of his face like lightning frozen in flesh, disappearing beneath the collar of suits that cost more than most people's annual salary. No one knew their full extent. No one dared ask, "Mr. Blackthorne?" His assistant materialized at his side, voice barely above a whisper. "The board is waiting." Adrian didn't acknowledge her. He never did. His gaze swept across the executive lounge where a dozen of New York's most powerful men and women had gathered for what should have been casual pre-meeting drinks. Now they resembled prey animals sensing a predator. "Tell them I'll be there when I'm ready." His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it more terrifying. The whispers followed him everywhere. 20 floors below in the gleaming Blackthorne Tower, employees scrambled to appear busy when his shadow darkened their doorways. Rivals plotted his downfall in hushed tones, never quite brave enough to move against him. The business world had given him a nickname, the Untouchable. Not because he couldn't be reached, 'cause no one wanted to. Adrian moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he owned piece by piece. His reflection stared back. Impeccable dark suit, broad shoulders, and those scars that had defined him for 12 years now. Behind that reflection, Manhattan sprawled like a glittering offering. "Sir." His assistant tried again. "Mr. Hale specifically requested." "Victor can wait like everyone else." A muscle twitched in Adrian's jaw. Victor Hale, the only man foolish enough to consider himself Adrian's equal. The thought of him sitting at the boardroom table, smug and whole, made something dark twist inside Adrian's chest. He pressed his palm against the cool glass, remembering another window, another life. Before the fire, before the screams, before he'd clawed his way out of the burning mansion, only to discover he was the sole survivor of what investigators called a tragic accident. Adrian knew better. There were no accidents in the Blackthorne world. "Your aunt called again," his assistant added, scrolling through her tablet. She insists on confirming your attendance at the charity gala next week. Marjorie, the only family he had left, though family was a generous term for their frigid relationship. She'd taken him in after the fire, not out of love but duty. Her constant refrain still echoed in his nightmares. Blackthorns don't show weakness. Blackthorns use pain as power. Tell her I'll be there. He turned from the window. And find me a new pianist for the event. The last one was inadequate. His assistant nodded, already typing. She never questioned why a man who showed no emotion demanded perfection in the music at his events. No one knew that music was the only thing that still reached past his scars, past the walls he'd built. The only thing that made him feel human, if only for moments. Adrian moved toward the boardroom, people parting before him like water around a stone. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. Heard he ruined the Davidsons last week. Never seen him smile, not once. Those scars, God, can you imagine waking up to that? The last comment, from a young executive who thought himself out of earshot, made Adrian pause. The room went deadly silent. He turned slowly, fixing the man with a gaze that had broken stronger souls. Mr. Reynolds, isn't it? Adrian's voice was velvet over steel. The man paled. Why, yes, sir. Curious. Adrian approached him with unhurried steps. You seem very concerned about my appearance. Perhaps you'd prefer to discuss it directly rather than behind my back. Reynolds swallowed visibly. No, sir. I apologize. I didn't mean. You didn't mean for me to hear. Adrian leaned closer, his scarred cheek now inches from the man's face. That's the problem with monsters, Mr. Reynolds. We have excellent hearing. The executive trembled. Someone gasped. Adrian straightened, adjusting his already perfect tie. Clear out your office by noon. Blackthorn Enterprises no longer requires your services. He continued toward the boardroom, leaving devastation in his wake. It was always the same. Fear, disgust, pity. He'd learned to use all three, wrapping them around himself like armor. What no one understood, what no one had ever bothered to discover, was that beneath the scars and the ruthlessness and the billion-dollar empire built on intimidation, there was still a man. A man who remembered what it was to feel something other than cold rage. A man who sometimes woke in the night, reaching for connections long turned to ash. But Adrian Blackthorn had buried that man years ago, in the same grave as his family name's legacy. Now he was exactly what they all believed, untouchable, unbreakable, and completely alone. As he pushed open the boardroom doors, 20 faces looked up in thinly veiled terror. Adrian took his seat at the head of the table, his expression revealing nothing. Shall we begin? He asked quietly. No one dared say no. The last note lingered in the air of the empty concert hall, a haunting whisper that Celine Marlowe wasn't quite ready to release. Her fingers hovered above the keys, reluctant to break the spell she'd woven. In these stolen moments before dawn, when the prestigious Eastman School of Music allowed graduates like her to practice, Celine found the peace that eluded her everywhere else. That was unexpected. Professor Winter's voice echoed from the back of the hall. The elderly woman moved slowly down the aisle, her cane tapping a gentle rhythm. Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor isn't meant to sound like that. Celine's hands fell to her lap. I'm sorry. I was just. Don't apologize. The professor settled beside the grand piano, her eyes sharp despite her age. You weren't playing Chopin. You were playing Celine. That's precisely what makes you extraordinary. A flush crept up Celine's neck. Praise always made her uncomfortable, a lingering effect of growing up with a grandmother who believed compliments led to complacency. Thank you for letting me use the hall, Celine said, gathering her worn leather music folder. I know it's against policy. Professor Winters waved away her concern. Rules are for those without talent. You have a gift that deserves space to breathe. She paused, studying Celine with the intensity that had intimidated generations of music students. But gifts don't pay rent, do they? Celine's smile tightened. I'm managing 3 jobs if the rumors are true. Teaching piano to spoiled children, waiting tables, and now these private events. The professor shook her head. Your parents would be. My parents aren't here. Celine closed the piano lid with more force than necessary. And I'm fine. Really. The truth was more complicated. At 28, Celine had expected to be touring with symphonies, not scraping together enough for the tiny Brooklyn apartment she shared with her best friend Evelyn. But life had its own rhythm, one that rarely followed the sheet music. Actually, Professor Winters said, reaching into her bag, that's why I came looking for you. She produced an elegant cream-colored envelope. An opportunity. Celine took it cautiously. The paper felt expensive, embossed with a stylized bee that seemed vaguely familiar. Blackthorn Enterprises is hosting their annual charity gala next Friday, the professor explained. Their regular pianist cancelled last minute. The pay is substantial. Celine's heart skipped. Blackthorn. Even in her world of classical music and modest ambitions, that name carried weight. Why me? Because I recommended you. Professor Winters' expression softened. And because you play like someone who understands both beauty and pain. That's rare, Celine. 3 hours later, Celine pushed through the door of Rosie's diner, tying her apron as she hurried toward the counter. The morning rush was in full swing, the small Queen's establishment packed with regulars who valued good coffee over fancy atmospheres. You're late, Marlowe. Rosie called from the grill, her voice gruff but without real anger. Table 6 has been asking for you. Celine grabbed a coffee pot and weaved through the crowded diner to where Evelyn sat surrounded by fabric swatches and design sketches. Her roommate looked up with a grin that quickly turned suspicious. You've got that look, Evelyn said, pushing aside her fashion school homework. The one that means either really good news or complete disaster. Celine filled Evelyn's cup before sliding into the booth. I got offered a gig. At the Blackthorn Charity Gala. Evelyn's eyes widened. Blackthorn. As in Adrian Blackthorn. The scariest man in Manhattan. It's just a piano job, Celine shrugged, though her stomach fluttered. 4 hours classical background music for rich people who won't actually listen. It's not just anything when it involves that man. Evelyn leaned forward, lowering her voice. My cousin works in fashion PR. She says he made an entire design team cry last month because the lighting at his product launch wasn't atmospherically correct, whatever that means. Celine had heard the stories. Everyone had. Adrian Blackthorn was as famous for his ruthlessness as for his scars. The mysterious fire that had claimed his family and marked his face was the stuff of urban legend. The pay would cover 3 months' rent, Celine said quietly. In one night. Evelyn's expression softened. That bad, huh? Celine nodded. The eviction notice had arrived yesterday, their 3rd this year. Between Evelyn's fashion school tuition and Celine's student loans, they were perpetually drowning. Take the gig, Evelyn decided, squeezing Celine's hand. Just don't catch his attention. People who do tend to regret it. Marlowe. Orders up. Rosie's voice cut through their conversation. The rest of Celine's shift passed in a blur of coffee refills and breakfast orders. By afternoon, she was at the Prescott Mansion on the Upper East Side, teaching 9-year-old Olivia Prescott to play scales while the girl complained about her French tutor. Miss Marlowe, why do you always look sad when you play? Olivia asked suddenly, her small fingers pausing on the keys. The question caught Celine off guard. Do I? Olivia nodded solemnly. Like you're remembering something that hurts but you can't stop thinking about it anyway. Children's perception could be unervingly accurate. Sometimes, Celine admitted, music helps us feel things we can't put into words. Like when Daddy left and Mommy played that sad song over and over. Celine's heart twisted. Something like that. Later, in the quiet of her apartment, Celine sat at her keyboard. A far cry from the grand piano she trained on, but all she could afford. The Blackthorn contract lay signed on her coffee table, the sum still making her dizzy. One night of playing for people who wouldn't listen could change everything. Her fingers found the keys and she began to play. Not the classical pieces she'd perform at the gala, but something raw and improvised. Music had been her sanctuary since she was 7, when her parents left her with a grandmother who offered discipline instead of affection. The piano never judged, never abandoned. It simply translated whatever she poured into it. The melody shifted, growing darker, more complex. Celine closed her eyes, letting herself imagine the gala. Crystal chandeliers, champagne flutes, power disguised as philanthropy. And somewhere in that glittering crowd, a man whose name made people tremble. Adrian Blackthorn, the untouchable billionaire with scars that matched his reputation. What kind of music would reach a man like that? What notes could possibly penetrate walls built so high? Celine's playing intensified, her small apartment filling with sound that seemed too vast for its walls. She didn't notice the tears sliding down her cheeks or the way her body swayed with each crescendo. For a moment, she wasn't a struggling pianist taking any job to survive. She was simply Celine, a woman who spoke through music when words failed, who found beauty in broken things, who somehow always believed that even the most damaged souls could still resonate if touched with the right frequency. The final chord hung in the air like a question, one she would soon have answered. Blackthorn Hall existed in a different universe from Celine's Brooklyn apartment. The neo-Gothic mansion stood apart from Manhattan's sleek skyscrapers, a relic of old money and older secrets. Its stone facade loomed against the twilight sky, windows glowing amber against encroaching darkness. Celine clutched her music portfolio tighter as the car service, arranged by Blackthorn Enterprises, pulled through wrought iron gates that seemed designed to keep people out rather than welcome them in. First time at the hall, the driver caught her wide-eyed reflection in the rearview mirror. Celine nodded, unable to tear her gaze from the mansion's imposing silhouette. "Word of advice," he said, voice dropping conspiratorially. "If Mr. Blackthorn speaks to you, which he won't, just answer directly. No small talk. And whatever you do, don't stare at his." He trailed off, but Celine understood. The scars. The physical manifestation of the tragedy that had transformed Adrian Blackthorn from privileged heir to feared tycoon. "I'm just here to play piano," she said softly. The driver chuckled. "Nobody's just anything at Blackthorn Hall, miss." Inside, the mansion was a study in controlled opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across marble floors. Fresh orchids adorned antique tables. Everything gleamed with the quiet confidence of wealth that had nothing to prove. A harried event coordinator intercepted Celine in the grand foyer, clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. "You must be the pianist." "Thank God." The woman, Claire, according to her name badge, looked like she hadn't slept in days. "The last one quit yesterday. Something about oppressive atmospheric conditions, whatever that means." Celine followed Claire through a maze of corridors where staff arranged champagne flutes and adjusted flower arrangements with military precision. The ballroom took Celine's breath away. A vast space with vaulted ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan's skyline, and at its center, a gleaming black Steinway grand piano that made her fingers itch with anticipation. "You'll play background pieces during cocktails and dinner," Claire explained, handing Celine a detailed schedule. "Nothing too melancholy. Mr. Blackthorn is very particular about the mood." "Has he requested any specific pieces?" Celine asked, already mentally revising her planned selections. Claire's laugh held no humor. "Mr. Blackthorn doesn't make requests. He makes demands." He checked her watch. "Guests arrive in 30 minutes. The piano is tuned and ready." Left alone, Celine approached the Steinway reverently. Her fingers trailed across its polished surface, cool and smooth as black ice. This instrument cost more than she would earn in a decade. She settled on the bench, adjusting its height, and began a gentle warm-up, letting her fingers reacquaint themselves with the weight and response of keys far more responsive than her worn keyboard at home. The first guests arrived precisely at 8. Women in designer gowns that cost small fortunes, men in tuxedos cut to disguise expanding waistlines. Celine transitioned smoothly into Debussy, keeping the mood light and sophisticated as champagne flowed and conversation hummed. No one paid her any attention. She was furniture, atmospheric enhancement, invisible, until he arrived. Celine didn't need to see the sudden shift in the crowd to know Adrian Blackthorne had entered. The ballroom's energy changed instantly. Conversations faltered, laughter died, bodies subtly angled away as if from a predator. But it was the silence that struck her most. 100 people, and you could hear crystal clinking against crystal. She kept playing, eyes focused on her hands, but her peripheral vision caught his entrance. Tall, imposing, in a black suit that made others look cheap by comparison. He moved with the confidence of a man who owned not just the room but everyone in it. The left side of his face remained in shadow as he greeted select guests with curt nods. "That's him," whispered a server pausing near the piano with a tray of canapés. "They say he fired his last chef because the man made eye contact for too long." Celine's rhythm faltered slightly before she recovered. The rumors surrounding Adrian Blackthorne seemed too outlandish to be true, yet the palpable fear he inspired suggested otherwise. "I heard he keeps the boardroom temperature at 60 degrees, another server added, just to watch his executives shiver through meetings. "My cousin works in his London office," the first server continued. "Says Blackthorne once bought a rival company just to dismantle it because their CEO called his scars unfortunate at a charity dinner." Celine transitioned into Satie, her fingers finding the haunting notes of Gymnopédie No. 1. The melancholy piece was a risk given Claire's instructions, but something compelled her to change the atmosphere. The servers drifted away, leaving Celine alone with the music and her growing curiosity about the man everyone feared. The gala proceeded with choreographed precision. Dinner was served. Speeches were made. A famous soprano performed an aria that received polite applause. Through it all, Celine played, occasionally catching glimpses of Adrian Blackthorne at the head table, isolated despite being surrounded by New York's elite. Not once did he look her way. Until she began Chopin's Nocturne in C-sharp minor. The piece wasn't on her approved list. It was too dark, too emotional for background music. But as the evening wore on and champagne loosened inhibitions, Celine found herself drawn to its melancholy beauty. Her fingers moved of their own accord, finding the notes that spoke of longing and loss. She was 3 measures in when she felt it, the weight of someone's gaze, heavy as a physical touch. Celine looked up, and for the first time that evening, met Adrian Blackthorne's eyes across the crowded ballroom. The world contracted to that single point of connection. His eyes were storm gray, intense, focused entirely on her with an expression she couldn't decipher. For a breathless moment, he was just a man listening to music. Not the feared tycoon, not the scarred recluse, but someone caught in the grip of unexpected emotion. The left side of his face was fully visible now. The scars were worse than rumor suggested. A network of healed tissue that pulled at his eye and the corner of his mouth, disappearing beneath his collar. Yet Celine found herself noticing not the scars but the pain behind his eyes. Ancient, guarded, and achingly familiar to anyone who had ever used music to speak what words could not. She didn't look away. Neither did he. Celine's playing deepened, her body swaying slightly as she poured herself into the piece. The room around them continued its glittering dance of wealth and pretense, but between pianist and billionaire stretched a fragile thread of recognition. Something in her music had reached past his walls. Something in his gaze made her play as if they were the only 2 people in the room. When the piece ended, Adrian Blackthorne was the first to look away. His expression shuttering closed like a vault. He turned to speak to an elegant older woman beside him. His Aunt Marjorie, Celine had heard, but his fingers drummed restlessly against the tablecloth. Celine returned to approved selections, her heart racing. She had done the one thing everyone warned against. She had caught Adrian Blackthorne's attention. And somehow, she knew nothing would be the same again. The charity auction was winding down. The wealthy patrons of Blackthorn Hall pleasantly intoxicated on expensive champagne and the warm glow of their own generosity. Celine had been playing for nearly 3 hours, her fingers moving automatically through pieces she could perform in her sleep. The event coordinator had signaled for her final set, something uplifting to send the guests home on a high note. Instead, Celine found herself drawn once more to Chopin. Not the Nocturne this time, but his Ballade No. 1 in G minor, a piece that began with deceptive simplicity before building to passionate intensity. It wasn't what she'd been instructed to play, but after that moment of connection with Adrian Blackthorn, she couldn't bring herself to return to bland background music. Across the room, Adrian stood near a wall of windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, a tumbler of amber liquid untouched in his hand. He'd spent the evening moving through the crowd like a shark through shallow water, people instinctively creating space around him, conversations faltering in his wake. Now he stood alone, the isolation around him almost visible despite the crowded ballroom. As Celine began the ballade, his head turned slightly toward the piano. She couldn't see his expression from this distance, but she felt his attention like a physical touch. The music flowed through her, building in complexity and emotion. Celine lost herself in the piece, forgetting the glittering crowd, the mansion, even her own precarious financial situation. There was only Chopin's genius and the strange, inexplicable awareness of the scarred billionaire listening from across the room. She was approaching the piece's tumultuous climax when Adrian Blackthorn did something unexpected. He began walking toward the piano, his movement deliberate, his gaze never leaving her. The crowd parted before him, conversations stuttering into silence. Even in a room full of powerful people, his presence commanded attention. Celine's heart raced, but her fingers never faltered. What did he want? Was he angry about her music selection? Would she be dismissed on the spot, the much-needed payment withheld? He was 15 feet away when the first shot rang out. The sound cracked through the ballroom like thunder, sharp, definitive, unmistakable. For one suspended moment nobody moved. Celine's fingers froze above the keys, the interrupted note hanging in the air. Then the second shot came and chaos erupted. Glass shattered as a bullet struck one of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Women screamed. Men shouted. A chandelier swayed precariously as people stampeded toward the exits. Security guards materialized, weapons drawn, shouting orders that nobody heeded. Celine remained frozen at the piano, her mind struggling to process what was happening. This wasn't possible. Things like this didn't happen in places like Blackthorn Hall, to people like her. Through the pandemonium, she spotted Adrian. Unlike everyone else, he wasn't running. He stood perfectly still in the center of the ballroom, his expression one of cold fury rather than fear. Their eyes met across the chaos, and in that moment, Celine understood with perfect clarity. The bullets were meant for him. The realization coincided with movement at the shattered window. A shadow, a glint of metal. The shooter wasn't finished. Celine didn't think. She didn't plan. Her body moved on pure instinct, launching from the piano bench toward Adrian Blackthorn. Time seemed to slow as she crossed the distance between them, aware of nothing except the need to reach him before the next shot came. "Get down!" she shouted, colliding with his solid frame just as the third shot exploded through the ballroom. They fell together, her smaller body somehow managing to pull the much larger man behind an overturned table. Glass rained down around them. Somewhere, a woman was sobbing hysterically. Security shouted coordinates into radios. Celine found herself practically in Adrian Blackthorn's lap, her hands gripping the lapels of his expensive suit, her face inches from his. This close, his scars were intricate maps of suffering, the damaged tissue a stark contrast to the perfect symmetry of the right side of his face. His eyes, those storm-gray eyes, stared at her with an expression she couldn't decipher. "Are you hit?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up slowly, his fingers brushing her cheek in a gesture so gentle it seemed impossible from a man with his reputation. When he pulled his hand away, his fingertips were red. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the chaos around them. Celine touched her own cheek, feeling the sting of a cut she hadn't noticed, likely from the flying glass. "It's nothing. We need to." "Why?" Adrian interrupted, his gaze intensifying. "Why did you do that?" The question confused her. "Do what?" "Pull me down. Shield me." His jaw tightened. "No one does that. Not for me." Before Celine could respond, security personnel surrounded them, creating a human barrier. A tall man with a military bearing knelt beside them, his focus entirely on Adrian. "Sir, we need to move you immediately. The perimeter is compromised." Adrian's eyes never left Celine's face. "Is the shooter contained?" "Negative. He escaped through the service entrance. Police are in pursuit." "And the guests?" "Being evacuated. Your aunt is already in the secure room." Adrian nodded once, then did something that made the security team exchange glances. He helped Celine to her feet, his hand firm around hers. "This woman comes with me," he said, in a tone that brooked no argument. "Sir, protocol dictates." "I don't care what protocol dictates." Adrian's voice remained quiet, but something in it made the security chief step back. "She just saved my life. She stays with me." Celine found herself swept into Adrian's wake as security created a path through the chaos. Dazed guests were still being herded toward exits. Medical personnel tended to those with cuts from the shattered glass. The beautiful ballroom now resembled a war zone. Overturned furniture, broken crystal, abandoned evening bags and suit jackets. As they passed the piano, Celine noticed with a pang that the magnificent Steinway had been damaged, a bullet hole marring its glossy surface. The sight brought the reality of the situation crashing down on her. Someone had tried to kill Adrian Blackthorne. She had thrown herself into the line of fire for a man she didn't know, a man whose reputation should have made her run in the opposite direction. Adrian followed her gaze to the damaged piano, something unreadable flickering across his face. His hand tightened around hers as they were hustled through a hidden door and into a service corridor. "You could have been killed," he said, so quietly only she could hear. Celine looked up at him, suddenly aware of how small she felt beside his towering frame. "So could you. My life has many enemies. Many people who would celebrate my death." His scarred face was impossible to read. "Why would you risk yourself for someone like me?" The question hung between them as security ushered them deeper into the mansion's labyrinth. Celine had no rational answer, only the truth. "Because in that moment, you didn't look like a monster everyone feared," she said softly. "You looked like a man who was about to die alone." Something shifted in Adrian Blackthorne's eyes, a crack in the impenetrable armor he wore like a second skin. For a heartbeat, Celine glimpsed the man behind the scars, behind the fearsome reputation. Then the moment passed, his expression hardening once more as they were led into what appeared to be a panic room, steel doors sealing behind them with pneumatic finality. Whatever connection had flared between them, whatever impulse had driven Celine to risk herself for him, it had changed something fundamental. She could feel it in the way he looked at her, in the way he hadn't let go of her hand. For better or worse, their fates were now intertwined. My dear listeners, as Celine and Adrian stand at this crossroads, I find myself pausing to connect with you. Are you feeling the tension between instinct and self-preservation in your own heart? Have you ever found yourself reaching out to someone everyone else avoided, seeing the humanity where others only saw reasons to fear? The most profound connections often begin in moments of crisis, don't they? If this story is resonating in those quiet places of your heart, please tap that like button and share it with someone who might need to remember that sometimes our most meaningful actions come not from calculation, but from compassion. Your support helps our community of dreamers grow. Now, let's return to our story and discover what happens when a woman who speaks through music meets a man who has forgotten how to listen. The panic room beneath Blackthorne Hall resembled a luxury bunker, all sleek surfaces and hidden technology. Monitors displayed security feeds from around the property. A small arsenal of weapons lined one wall. The space was designed for survival, not comfort, despite the expensive leather furniture and fully stocked bar. Celine sat perched on the edge of a sofa, a medical technician cleaning the cut on her cheek. The adrenaline that had carried her through the chaos was fading, leaving her hands trembling slightly. She couldn't stop replaying the moment. The sound of gunfire, the shattered glass, the inexplicable impulse that had driven her toward danger rather than away from it. Across the room, Adrian Blackthorne stood with his back to her, speaking in low, controlled tones to his head of security. His posture betrayed no fear, no shock, only cold, calculated anger. This was a man accustomed to threats, perhaps even assassination attempts. The realization sent a chill through Celine. What kind of life did he lead that made such violence almost expected? "The police have secured the perimeter," the security chief was saying. "No sign of the shooter. We're reviewing camera footage now." Adrian nodded once. "And my aunt, Mrs. Blackthorne, has been escorted home with additional security." "Good." Adrian turned slightly, his scarred profile harsh under the room's recessed lighting. "Leave us." The command cleared the room instantly. Security personnel, medical staff, all filed out through the heavy steel door, which sealed with a pneumatic hiss. Suddenly, Celine found herself alone with the most feared man in Manhattan. Adrian moved to the bar, pouring amber liquid into 2 crystal tumblers. His movements were precise, controlled, betraying nothing of what he might be feeling. When he turned to face her fully, his expression was unreadable. "Drink this," he said, offering her one of the glasses. "It will help with the shock." Celine accepted it cautiously. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He remained standing, looming over her seated form. "You don't know what you've done." The whiskey burned a path down her throat. "I stopped you from getting shot, I think. And in doing so, you've made yourself a target." His voice was soft, almost gentle, which somehow made his words more frightening. "Whoever wants me dead now knows your face." The implication settled over Celine like a weight. She hadn't considered the consequences beyond the immediate moment. "I didn't think." Clearly, Adrian cut her off, but without the sharpness she expected. He studied her with clinical detachment. "Most people run from danger, Miss Marlowe. They certainly don't throw themselves in front of bullets meant for someone they don't know." "Celine," she corrected automatically. "And I'm not most people." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise perhaps at her lack of intimidation. He took a measured sip of his whiskey before setting the glass down with deliberate care. "No," he agreed quietly. "You're not." He moved closer, his tall frame casting her in shadow. In the confined space of the panic room, his presence was overwhelming, not just physically, but in some indefinable way that made the air feel charged. Celine resisted the urge to shrink back. "You still haven't answered my question," Adrian said. "Why did you do it?" Celine met his gaze directly. "I told you. You looked like a man about to die alone," he finished for her. "Yes, I heard you. What I don't understand is why that would compel you to risk your life." The question hung between them, demanding honesty. Celine considered deflecting, offering some platitude about human decency or instinctive reaction. But something in Adrian Blackthorne's intense gaze pulled the truth from her. "I know what it's like," she said softly. "To be surrounded by people yet completely alone. To have others look at you but never really see you." She set her glass down, her fingers tracing its cut crystal pattern. "When I play, sometimes I feel like I'm screaming through the music, but no one hears the message, just the notes." Adrian went very still. For a moment, he looked almost vulnerable, the fearsome mask slipping to reveal something raw underneath. "And what did you see?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "When you looked at me?" "Someone who understands that kind of loneliness." Celine's honesty surprised even herself. The scars on your face aren't what make people afraid of you, Mr. Blackthorn. It's the walls you've built so high that no one can reach you." The silence that followed was deafening. Adrian's expression hardened, his jaw tightening as he turned away from her. For a terrible moment, Celine thought she'd gone too far, crossed some invisible line that would unleash the legendary Blackthorn temper. Instead, he laughed, a short, harsh sound with no humor in it. "Adrian," he said, still facing away from her, "if you're going to psychoanalyze me, you might as well use my first name." Celine released the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I wasn't trying to. You were." He turned back to her, something different in his eyes now, a dangerous intensity that made her pulse quicken. "And the truly unsettling thing, Celine, is that you're not entirely wrong." He moved toward her with predatory grace, closing the distance between them until he stood directly before her. Slowly, deliberately, he crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. This close, she could see the intricate patterns of his scars, the flecks of silver in his gray eyes, the perfect symmetry of the undamaged side of his face. "Do you know what happens to people who see too clearly?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt more than heard. Celine swallowed hard but didn't look away. "They become inconvenient." A smile ghosted across his lips, the first she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, making him suddenly, startlingly handsome despite the scars. "Precisely." He reached out, his fingers hovering near the bandage on her cheek without quite touching it. "And I find myself in the unusual position of not wanting any harm to come to you." The admission seemed to cost him something. He straightened abruptly, putting distance between them once more. "My security team will escort you home," he said, his tone shifting back to businesslike efficiency. "Additional personnel will be assigned to watch your residence until we identify the shooter." "That's not necessary," Celine protested. "I can't afford." "You misunderstand." Adrian's expression brooked no argument. "This isn't a service I'm offering. It's a reality I'm imposing. Your safety is now my concern, whether either of us wants it to be." The steel door hissed open as if on cue. The security chief stood waiting, his expression impassive. "We're ready when you are, Miss Marlowe." Celine rose, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. Her elegant performance dress torn at the hem, her hair falling from its careful updo, dried blood on her collar. She felt Adrian watching her as she gathered her belongings. At the threshold she paused, looking back at him. He stood exactly where she'd left him, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable once more. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "I don't regret it." Something flickered in his eyes, a crack in the perfect control. "You might," he replied. "Before this is over, you very well might." The door sealed between them, but Celine carried the image of his face with her. Not the scars or the fearsome reputation, but the moment of vulnerability when she'd spoken of loneliness. For a brief instant, she'd glimpsed the man behind the monster everyone feared. And against all reason, she wanted to see him again. 3 days after the shooting at Blackthorn Hall, Celine's life had developed a shadow. She noticed it first outside Rosie's diner, a dark sedan with tinted windows parked across the street during her entire shift. Then at the Prescott mansion, where a new gardener appeared, one who seemed more interested in watching the perimeter than tending plants. Even at the music school, unfamiliar faces lingered in hallways, their earpieces and vigilant eyes betraying their purpose. Adrian Blackthorn was having her watched. The realization should have frightened her. Instead, it ignited a slow-burning anger that culminated in her storming out of her apartment building to confront the 2 men in the black SUV who'd been parked there since dawn. "Tell your boss I want to speak with him," she demanded, arms crossed against the autumn chill. "Now!" The security men exchanged glances. The driver rolled down his window. "Miss Marlowe, we're just here to—" "I know exactly why you're here," Celine cut him off. "And I want to speak with the man who put you here." "Mr. Blackthorn doesn't take unscheduled meetings," the second man said, his tone suggesting this was common knowledge. Celine leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Then I guess I'll have to make a scene. Maybe talk to some reporters about the shooting at Blackthorn Hall. I'm sure they'd love to hear from an eyewitness." It was a bluff. She had no intention of speaking to the press, but the threat had its intended effect. The driver made a call, speaking in hushed tones while Celine waited, shivering slightly in the October breeze. "A car will be here in 10 minutes, he finally said, not looking pleased. "Mr. Blackthorn will see you at his office." Blackthorn Tower dominated the Manhattan skyline, 70 stories of gleaming glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. Celine felt distinctly out of place in the soaring lobby with its marble floors and hushed atmosphere of wealth. Her simple jeans and sweater drew subtle glances from employees in tailored suits who clearly recognized she didn't belong. A sleek private elevator whisked her to the top floor without stopping. When the doors opened, Celine stepped into Adrian's domain, a minimalist expanse of black and white with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city below. His assistant, a poised woman with a perfect poker face, led Celine through a series of increasingly exclusive spaces until they reached a set of double doors. "He's expecting you," the woman said, opening one door without knocking. Adrian Blackthorn stood at the windows, his back to the door, a silhouette against the panoramic view. He didn't turn when Celine entered, didn't acknowledge her presence at all until the door closed behind her. "You threatened my security team," he said, his voice carrying clearly across the vast office. "Creative." "You've been having me followed," Celine countered, refusing to be intimidated by the space or the man. "Invasive." He turned then, and Celine was struck again by the contradictions in his appearance, the perfect tailoring of his charcoal suit, the commanding presence, the harsh beauty of his features despite, or perhaps enhanced by, the scars. "I've been having you protected," he corrected, moving toward a seating area of low leather furniture. He gestured for her to sit. "There's a difference." Celine remained standing. "Not when it's done without my consent." Something flickered across Adrian's face. Surprise, perhaps, at her defiance. Most people didn't challenge him, she realized. They were too afraid of the consequences. "Consent requires choice," he said, pouring water from a crystal decanter. "You lost that luxury when you threw yourself between me and a bullet." "I saved your life," Celine reminded him. "That doesn't make me your responsibility." Adrian's expression hardened. "The shooter hasn't been caught. Whoever targeted me now knows your face. These are facts, not interpretations." He offered her a glass, which she reluctantly accepted. "My security team stays." Celine took a deliberate sip of water, using the moment to gather her thoughts. Adrian Blackthorn was used to issuing commands and having them obeyed without question. She needed to change the dynamic. "I have 3 jobs," she said finally. "I teach piano to children whose parents scrutinize everyone who enters their homes. I wait tables at a diner where regulars notice unfamiliar faces. I practice at a music school where strange men loitering in hallways cause concern." She set the glass down with a decisive click. "Your protection is disrupting my life." Adrian studied her with those storm-gray eyes, his expression unreadable. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile she'd glimpsed in the panic room, but something genuine that transformed his face. "You're not afraid of me," he observed, sounding almost pleased. "Should I be?" The question hung between them, charged with possibilities. Adrian moved closer, his height forcing Celine to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Most people are," he said quietly. "I'm not most people," she reminded him. "We established that." Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his perpetual guard. "No, you're not." He gestured again to the seating area. "Please sit. Let's find a compromise." The word compromise sounded foreign on his lips, as if it belonged to a language he rarely spoke. Celine sat, surprised by this concession. Adrian remained standing, his restless energy apparent in the way he paced before the windows. "I have a proposition," he said finally. "One that solves both our problems." "I'm listening." "Move into Blackthorn Hall temporarily." He held up a hand when she began to protest. "Hear me out. The mansion has a separate guest wing with its own entrance. You would have complete privacy, including a music room with a Steinway grand. My security is already in place, so there would be no need for obvious surveillance disrupting your daily life." Celine stared at him, momentarily speechless. "You want me to move into your house?" "It's hardly a house," Adrian said dryly. "The East Wing alone is larger than most Manhattan apartments. You would rarely see me." "That's not the point," Celine countered. "Why would you offer this? You don't know me." Adrian's expression turned serious. "I know you risked your life for mine without hesitation or expectation of reward. That makes you either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish." His voice softened slightly. "Either way, I find myself concerned for your safety." The admission seemed to cost him something. Adrian Blackthorn didn't appear to be a man accustomed to expressing concern for others. "And if I refuse?" Celine asked. "Then the obvious surveillance continues." He shrugged, the gesture elegant despite its casualness. "Your choice." It wasn't really a choice at all, and they both knew it. Celine rose, moving to the windows to gather her thoughts. The city spread below them, people reduced to tiny specks from this height. How strange to have such a view, to see everything while remaining separate from it all. Was that how Adrian lived his life? Observing but never participating. She turned to find him watching her, his scarred face half illuminated by the afternoon sun. For a brief moment, she saw past the billionaire, past the fearsome reputation, to the man beneath. Someone who had survived terrible loss, who had rebuilt himself from ashes, who perhaps had forgotten how to connect without controlling. "1 week," she said finally. "I'll stay for 1 week while you find the shooter. After that, we reassess." Relief flickered across Adrian's face before his usual mask of control returned. "Acceptable." He moved to his desk, pressing an intercom button. "Miss Chen, please make arrangements for Miss Marlowe to move into the East Wing." "Today." "Today," Celine protested. "I need time to." "Time is a luxury we don't have," Adrian cut her off, his tone brooking no argument. "My security team will help you pack essentials. Anything else you need can be purchased." The casual display of wealth and power should have annoyed her. Instead, Celine found herself studying the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed briefly against the desk, signs that his commanding exterior masked genuine concern. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "The truth, Adrian." He went still at the sound of his name on her lips. When he looked at her, the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Because for the first time in 12 years, he said, his voice barely audible, "someone looked at me and saw a man worth saving. That creates a debt I intend to repay." The raw honesty in his words silenced any further objections. As arrangements were made and calls placed, Celine found herself drawn into Adrian Blackthorn's orbit, a dangerous place to be, according to everyone who knew him. Yet as she watched him move through his world with controlled precision, she couldn't help wondering what it would take to crack that perfect control, and what might be revealed if she did. Blackthorn Hall at night was a different creature entirely. Shadows pooling in corners where daylight never reached, ancient wood creaking with secrets, moonlight casting the stained glass windows into jeweled patterns across marble floors. Celine had been in residence for 3 days, and still, the mansion's vastness disoriented her. True to his word, Adrian had given her complete privacy. The East Wing was essentially a luxury apartment, with its own kitchen, living areas, and the promised music room housing a Steinway even finer than the one that had been damaged during the shooting. Security was present but discreet. No obvious surveillance, just the knowledge that she was being watched over. She had barely seen Adrian himself. Glimpses in hallways. A brief, formal dinner the first night where conversation remained superficial. He was polite but distant, as if having her in his home was a necessary inconvenience rather than a choice. Tonight, unable to sleep, Celine had wandered to the music room. Moonlight spilled through tall windows, illuminating the piano like a spotlight on a darkened stage. She sat at the bench, not playing at first, just running her fingers over the cool keys. The events of the past week felt surreal. The shooting, the danger, now living in the mansion of Manhattan's most feared billionaire. Her life had veered so dramatically from its usual path that playing seemed the only way to center herself again. She began softly, a nocturne that matched the hushed atmosphere. The piano's tone was exquisite, each note hanging in the air with perfect clarity. Celine closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her without conscious thought. She played what she felt: confusion, fear, and beneath it all, a strange, inexplicable pull toward the scarred man whose life she had saved. So absorbed was she in the music that she didn't notice Adrian's presence until she finished the piece. The final note faded, and in the silence that followed, she heard his quiet breathing from the doorway. Celine turned, startled. Adrian stood watching her, his tall frame silhouetted against the hallway light. He wore no jacket, his white shirt open at the collar, his usual perfect composure slightly relaxed. In this light, with his guard lowered, he looked younger, less formidable. "I'm sorry," she said. "Did I wake you? I don't sleep much." He entered the room slowly, as if giving her time to object to his presence. When she didn't, he moved to stand beside the piano. "That piece, it wasn't Chopin." Celine shook her head. "It wasn't anything. I was improvising." Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps. "You composed that just now?" "Not composed exactly. Just felt it." She shifted on the bench, suddenly self-conscious under his intense gaze. "Music has always been how I process emotions." Adrian nodded, his expression thoughtful. "My mother played," he said, the words coming slowly, as if extracted at great cost. "Not professionally, but with passion. This was her piano, actually." The personal revelation, small as it was, felt significant coming from a man so private. Celine remained silent, afraid that speaking might break whatever had prompted this moment of openness. Adrian's fingers brushed the piano's polished surface, a gesture so gentle it seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. She used to say that music was the language of the soul, that it spoke what words couldn't express. "She sounds wise," Celine said softly. She was. His voice hardened slightly. "Until the fire took her. Took them all." The weight of those words hung in the moonlit room. Celine knew the basic story. Everyone in New York did. The mysterious fire that had claimed the Blackthorne family, leaving only Adrian alive but scarred. The tragedy that had transformed him from privileged heir to ruthless tycoon. But knowing the public version was different from hearing it from him. "I'm sorry," she said, the words inadequate but sincere. Adrian's laugh held no humor. "Everyone's sorry. It's what people say when they don't know what else to say." He moved to the window, moonlight casting half his face in silver, half in shadow. "No one asks what really happened that night." Celine hesitated, then asked the question he seemed to be waiting for. "What did happen, Adrian?" For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, his voice so low she had to strain to hear. "I was 19, home from college for the weekend. My parents were hosting a dinner party. Boring business associates, the usual networking." His profile was sharp against the window. "I'd gone to bed early, claiming a headache. In truth, I was just tired of playing the perfect son." He fell silent, lost in memory. Celine waited, giving him space to continue or stop as he needed. "The smoke woke me," he finally said. "Not the alarms, they never sounded. Just the smoke, thick and choking. The hallway was already engulfed. I could hear screaming from downstairs, my mother calling my name." Adrian's hands clenched at his sides. "I tried to reach them. The flames were everywhere, moving too fast for a natural fire. Part of the ceiling collapsed. That's when. He gestured vaguely toward his scarred face. I was trapped, burning. A servant, our groundskeeper, pulled me out through a window. By then, the entire West Wing was gone. His voice had gone flat, emotionless. 7 people died that night. My parents, 2 cousins, 3 dinner guests. Celine felt tears pricking her eyes, not just for the tragedy itself but for the way he recounted it. Clinical, detached, as if he'd walled off the pain so completely that even he couldn't access it anymore. The official report called it an electrical fire, Adrian continued. Faulty wiring in the old wing. A tragic accident. But you don't believe that, Celine said, understanding dawning. Adrian turned to face her fully, his expression hard. The wiring had been inspected 2 weeks earlier. And accidents don't disable every smoke detector in a mansion simultaneously. The implication was clear. You think it was deliberate? I know it was. His certainty was chilling. Someone wanted the Blackthorne family dead that night. They almost succeeded. Celine rose from the piano bench, drawn toward him by an impulse she couldn't name. Have you told the police this? With what evidence? It's all circumstantial. And after 12 years. He shook his head. Besides, the Blackthorne Empire was in chaos after my parents' death. If I'd pursued it then, everything they built would have collapsed. So instead you rebuilt it, Celine said softly. Made it stronger. Untouchable. Something shifted in Adrian's eyes. Recognition perhaps at being truly seen. Yes. And the scars became your armor, she continued, understanding him with a clarity that surprised them both. A constant reminder of what happens when you let your guard down. Adrian went very still. They stood close now, close enough that Celine could see the intricate patterns of his scars in the moonlight. Not random damage but a map of survival etched into his skin. You see too much, he said, his voice barely audible. Or maybe everyone else sees too little. Without thinking, Celine reached up, her fingers hovering near his scarred cheek. Adrian flinched slightly but didn't pull away. A man unaccustomed to gentle touches, bracing for pain that didn't come. Her fingertips brushed his skin with feather-light pressure, tracing the edge of a scar that ran from temple to jaw. The texture was different, smoother in some places, slightly raised in others, but not repulsive as rumor suggested. Just evidence of what he had endured. Does it still hurt? She asked softly. Adrian's eyes closed briefly at her touch. Not physically. The admission, so simple yet so profound, cracked something open between them. When he looked at her again, the walls had lowered, allowing Celine to see what few ever had. The raw pain of the boy who had lost everything, the crushing guilt of the survivor, the lonely man behind the monster everyone feared. Play something, he said suddenly. Please. The request surprised her, but Celine understood its meaning. Words had reached their limit. Now they needed another language. She returned to the piano, feeling Adrian follow. He stood beside the instrument, close enough that she could sense his presence but not so close as to crowd her. Celine let her fingers find the keys, playing not a classical piece this time but something entirely her own. A melody that spoke of loss and survival, of fire and rebirth, of scars both visible and hidden. As she played, she felt rather than saw Adrian's response. The gradual easing of tension, the silent tears he would never acknowledge, the first tentative steps of a wounded soul toward healing. In the moonlit music room of Blackthorne Hall, surrounded by the ghosts of his past, Adrian Blackthorne allowed himself to be vulnerable for the first time in 12 years. And Celine Marlowe, with nothing but her music and her compassion, began to heal wounds that wealth and power could never touch. Something had shifted between them after that night in the music room. Adrian no longer avoided Celine's presence but seemed to seek it out. Casual encounters in the mansion's library, morning coffee in the solarium, walks through the extensive gardens where autumn painted the landscape in fire colors. Their conversations remained careful, circling around personal revelations like wary dancers, but the wall between them had developed hairline cracks. A week had passed since Celine had moved into Blackthorn Hall, the deadline they'd agreed upon, but neither mentioned her leaving. The shooter remained at large. The investigation stalled despite Adrian's considerable resources. It was the perfect excuse to maintain their arrangement, though Celine suspected they both knew it had become more than a security measure. On the 8th morning, Celine entered the breakfast room to find Adrian already there, not eating but studying documents spread across the table. His expression was thunderous, a muscle working in his jaw as he read. He looked up when she entered, his storm-gray eyes dark with something that made her pause in the doorway. "What's wrong?" she asked. Adrian hesitated, clearly debating how much to share. Since the night in the music room, he'd been more open with her, but his instinct for secrecy ran deep. "Come here," he finally said, gesturing to the chair beside him. Celine approached, glancing at the documents. Financial reports, security briefings, and photographs. One image in particular caught her attention. A distinguished-looking man with silver hair and a politician's smile, shaking hands with another man whose face was just outside the frame. "Victor Hale," Adrian said, noting her interest. "My chief competitor and a man who has tried to destroy me for the better part of a decade." Celine studied the photograph. "He doesn't look like an assassin. Men like Hale don't pull triggers," Adrian replied, his voice cold. "They pay others to do it, maintaining plausible deniability." He pushed a security report toward her. Celine scanned it, her blood chilling at the clinical description of the ballroom shooting and subsequent investigation. "The bullet fragments recovered from the scene match a very specific type of ammunition," Adrian explained. "Custom-made, traceable to only a handful of sources, one of which recently supplied a private security firm owned by a shell company that, when traced through several layers of corporate obfuscation, connects to Hale Industries." Celine looked up, meeting his gaze. "You think Victor Hale tried to have you killed?" "I know he did." Adrian's certainty was absolute. "The question is why now? Hale and I have been enemies for years, but he's never escalated to violence before." He rose, moving to the window with the restless energy that seemed to consume him whenever he was troubled. Sunlight caught the left side of his face, illuminating his scars in stark relief. "There's something else," he said, his back to her. "Something I haven't told you." Celine waited, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to reveal. "I've been investigating the fire," Adrian said quietly. "The one that killed my family. For years, I've had private investigators following leads, gathering evidence that the police overlooked or ignored." He turned to face her, his expression grim. 3 weeks ago we found something. Financial records suggesting that someone profited enormously from the Blackthorn family's deaths. Someone who purchased massive amounts of stock in our company the day after the fire, when prices plummeted. "Victor Hale," Celine guessed, the pieces falling into place. Adrian nodded once. The transactions were buried under layers of offshore accounts and dummy corporations, but the trail leads back to him. "He built his initial fortune on the ashes of my family." The magnitude of this revelation stunned Celine. Not just attempted murder, but a calculated massacre 12 years ago that had left Adrian scarred and alone. "Have you gone to the authorities?" she asked. "Not yet. The evidence is still circumstantial, enough to convince me, but not enough for a prosecution." Adrian's expression hardened. "Besides, Hale has half the city's officials in his pocket. This needs to be airtight before I move against him." Celine rose, moving to stand beside him at the window. "And you think the shooting at the gala was because he realized you were getting close to the truth?" "It's the only explanation that makes sense." Adrian's hand clenched at his side. "Hale must have discovered my investigation and decided to eliminate the threat before I could expose him." The danger of their situation suddenly felt much more immediate. This wasn't just about a random shooting. It was about a powerful man protecting himself from exposure as a mass murderer. And now Celine was entangled in it all. "You should leave," Adrian said abruptly, as if reading her thoughts. Go somewhere far from New York from me. I can arrange it. New identity, financial security, whatever you need. The offer surprised her. You want me to run away. I want you to be safe. His voice roughened with an emotion he seemed reluctant to name. Hale now knows you're connected to me. That makes you a target, a way to get to me. I'm not afraid, Celine said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. Adrian turned to her, his expression intense. You should be. Men like Hale don't leave witnesses or loose ends. And men like you, she challenged. Do they send away people who matter to them at the first sign of danger? The question hung between them, charged with implications neither had voiced aloud. Adrian's gaze searched her face, looking for something Celine wasn't sure she was ready to acknowledge. People who matter to me have a habit of ending up dead, he said finally, his voice low. I won't add you to that list. Before Celine could respond, the door opened and Adrian's head of security entered, his expression grave. Sir, we have a situation. He glanced at Celine, clearly hesitant to speak in front of her. She stays, Adrian said firmly. What is it? The surveillance team at Hale's estate reports unusual activity. Multiple vehicles arriving, security personnel being positioned around the perimeter. Something's happening. Adrian's expression darkened. He's preparing for something. Or someone. There's more, the security chief continued. We've identified the shooter from the gala. Former military, now works as a private contractor. He was spotted entering Hale Tower an hour ago. The implications were clear. Hale wasn't hiding his connection to the assassination attempt. He was flaunting it. Power move designed to intimidate. Increase security here, Adrian ordered. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization. And get me everything we have on Hale's movements for the past week. As the security chief left, Adrian turned back to Celine, his expression resolute. This changes things. Hale is making his next move, and he's not being subtle about it. What are you going to do? Celine asked, fear and determination warring within her. Adrian's smile was cold, predatory, a glimpse of the ruthless businessman who had built an empire on intimidation. I'm going to do what Blackthorns have always done. I'm going to destroy my enemy before he can destroy me. He moved to the table, gathering the documents with swift efficiency. Tonight, I'm meeting with my legal team and board of directors. We're accelerating the plan to take control of Hale Industries through a hostile takeover. Will that stop him? Celine asked. It will distract him, Adrian replied. Force him to defend his company while I gather the final evidence linking him to the fire. He paused, his expression softening slightly as he looked at her. But it also means I've just made myself an even bigger target. And by extension, so are you. The danger that had seemed abstract before now felt palpable, a shadow stretching toward them both. Yet strangely, Celine wasn't afraid. Not for herself at least. What terrified her was the thought of Adrian facing this alone, as he had faced everything since the night of the fire. I'm not leaving, she said firmly. Not now. Adrian studied her for a long moment, conflict evident in his eyes, the desire to protect her warring with something deeper, something he wasn't ready to name. Then stay close, he finally said, his voice rough with emotion, because Hale won't stop until one of us is destroyed. And I've already lost everyone I ever cared about to that man's ambition. The admission that she was someone he cared about hung in the air between them, unacknowledged but undeniable. As they stood in the sunlit breakfast room, the shadow of Victor Hale's vengeance loomed over Blackthorn Hall, threatening to consume them both. Yet in that shadow, something else was growing, a connection neither had expected, a bond forged in shared danger and mutual understanding. Something that made running away impossible no matter the risk. The next 48 hours transformed Blackthorn Hall into a fortress and a war room. Security personnel patrolled the grounds with military precision. Adrian's executive team came and went for urgent meetings, their faces grim with the gravity of what they were undertaking, the hostile takeover of Hale Industries, a move that would send shockwaves through the financial world. Through it all, Celine remained, a quiet presence in the storm. She had called Rosie's Diner and the Prescott family to request time off, citing a family emergency. Her absence from her normal life felt strangely liberating, as if she had stepped into another world, one where her music and Adrian's battle against Hale were the only realities that mattered. They had fallen into an unexpected rhythm. During the day, Adrian worked with ruthless focus, orchestrating the complex financial maneuvers that would strip Victor Hale of his company and power. At night, he would find Celine in the music room where she played for him, sometimes classical pieces, sometimes her own compositions that seemed to give voice to the emotions neither could express in words. They never spoke of what was growing between them. It existed in shared glances, in the way Adrian's hand would occasionally brush hers, in the gradual softening of his expression when she entered a room. It was fragile, unnamed, a tender shoot growing in the shadow of danger. On the third evening, Celine was returning from the library when voices from Adrian's study made her pause. The door was ajar, and through the gap, she could see Adrian standing by the fireplace, his back rigid with tension. His Aunt Marjorie sat in a leather chair, her elegant posture belying the steel in her voice. "You're being reckless, Adrian," Marjorie was saying. "Taking on Hale directly, and for what? Evidence that may not even exist. Evidence of a crime 12 years cold." "He killed them," Adrian replied, his voice low and dangerous. "All of them. I won't let him escape justice any longer." Marjorie sighed, the sound weary rather than sympathetic. "And this girl, this pianist, what role does she play in your vendetta?" Celine froze, knowing she should walk away but unable to move. "Celine has nothing to do with this," Adrian said sharply. "Doesn't she?" Marjorie's tone was cutting. "The entire city is talking, Adrian." The feared, untouchable Adrian Blackthorne, suddenly inseparable from a nobody musician who just happened to save his life, "makes you look weak, vulnerable." "I don't care how it looks. You should." Marjorie rose, moving to stand before her nephew. Even from the doorway, Celine could see the coldness in the older woman's eyes. "Hale will use her against you. She's a liability, a weakness he can exploit." Adrian turned away, staring into the fire. The silence stretched, heavy with implication. "What exactly is she to you, Adrian?" Marjorie pressed. "A distraction. A novelty. Some misguided attempt at redemption." When Adrian finally spoke, his voice had changed, become the cold, controlled tone Celine remembered from their first meeting. "She's nothing. A temporary complication that will be resolved once Hale is dealt with." The words struck Celine like physical blows. "Nothing. A complication to be resolved. Then send her away," Marjorie urged. "Before she becomes a target Hale can use to destroy everything you've built." Adrian's shoulders tensed, but his voice remained detached. "I'll handle it. She'll be gone by tomorrow." Celine backed away from the door, her heart hammering painfully against her ribs. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet as Adrian's words echoed in her mind. Nothing. Complication. Gone by tomorrow. How could she have been so foolish? She had allowed herself to believe that their connection meant something, that the man who shared his pain in the moonlit music room, who listened to her play with such intensity, who sought her company in quiet moments, might actually care for her. But Marjorie was right. What could she possibly be to a man like Adrian Blackthorne except a liability? A weakness in his armor that enemies could exploit. She had saved his life, and he had protected her in return. The debt was paid. Anything else she had imagined was just that. Imagination. Celine retreated to the east wing, moving through the luxurious rooms that had never truly been hers. She packed quickly, taking only what she had brought with her. The beautiful dresses that had appeared in the closet, the jewelry left discreetly on the vanity, all remained untouched. She wanted nothing from Adrian Blackthorne except the dignity of leaving on her own terms. She was zipping her small suitcase when the door opened behind her. She didn't need to turn to know who it was. She felt his presence like a change in atmospheric pressure. "You're leaving." Adrian's voice was flat, a statement rather than a question. Celine straightened, forcing herself to meet his gaze. His expression was carefully blank, the mask firmly back in place. "Isn't that what you want?" she asked, hating the tremor in her voice. "For the temporary complication to be resolved?" Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, then understanding. "You overheard. Enough to understand my place in your world." Celine lifted her chin, determined not to show how deeply his words had wounded her. Or lack thereof. Adrian moved further into the room, his tall frame seeming to diminish the space. "What you heard wasn't the truth," Celine interrupted. "Then what was it, Adrian? A convenient lie for your aunt? Or is that what you tell yourself to justify whatever this has been between us?" His jaw tightened. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand perfectly." Celine picked up her suitcase, needing to escape before her composure cracked entirely. "You're at war with a man who destroyed your family. You can't afford weaknesses or distractions. And that's all I am to you, a liability in your crusade against Hale." "That's not." Adrian began, then stopped, conflict evident in his expression. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened. "Perhaps it's better this way. Safer for you to be far from me." The confirmation of her fears was somehow worse than the overheard conversation. Celine moved toward the door, but Adrian blocked her path, not touching her but preventing her escape. "At least let my security team take you somewhere safe," he said. "Hale still knows your face. You're still in danger. I managed my life before you, Adrian. I'll manage it after." Celine looked up at him, searching for any crack in his perfect control, any sign that sending her away was costing him something. "Please move." For a moment, something raw and vulnerable flashed across his face, a glimpse of the man behind the mask, the one who had shared his pain in the music room. Then it was gone, replaced by the cold, untouchable billionaire everyone feared. "As you wish." He stepped aside. "I'll have a car brought around." Celine moved past him, then paused at the threshold. "You know what the saddest part is? For a little while I thought I saw the real you. Not the monster everyone fears, not the ruthless businessman, but the man beneath it all. I thought that man might actually be capable of caring for someone." Adrian's expression didn't change, but his hands clenched at his sides. "That man died in the fire 12 years ago. All that's left is what you see now." "No," Celine said softly. "He's still there. He's just too afraid to live again." She walked away then, her steps echoing in the vast hallway of Blackthorn Hall. Adrian didn't follow, didn't call after her. She hadn't expected him to. Men like Adrian Blackthorn didn't run after anyone. They let people go with the same cold efficiency with which they acquired them. Outside, the autumn night was chilly, the sky clear and star-filled above the mansion's imposing silhouette. As the car pulled away from Blackthorn Hall, Celine allowed herself one backward glance. A solitary figure stood at an upstairs window, tall, straight-backed, watching her departure with an expression she couldn't see but could somehow feel across the distance. Then the car turned onto the main road, and Adrian Blackthorn disappeared from view, taking with him the brief, beautiful illusion that someone could look past his scars and her ordinary existence to find something worth risking everything for. My dear listeners, as Celine drives away from Blackthorn Hall with a shattered heart, I find myself wondering about the walls we build to protect ourselves. Have you ever walked away from love because it felt too dangerous? Perhaps you recognized something beautiful growing between you and another soul, but fear whispered that you weren't worthy, or that loving them would only bring pain to you both. The most profound connections often come with the greatest risks, don't they? Adrian believes he's protecting Celine by pushing her away, never realizing that in doing so, he's inflicting the very wound he fears. If this moment resonates with your own heart's journey, if you've ever chosen safety over vulnerability, certainty over possibility, Tap that like button and share your experience in the comments. Sometimes our greatest regrets aren't the risks we took, but the ones we were too afraid to take. Now, let's return to our story and discover whether Adrian will realize what he's losing before it's too late. 3 days after leaving Blackthorn Hall, Celine found herself back in the rhythm of her old life, teaching piano to disinterested children, waiting tables at Rosie's, practicing in empty classrooms when the music school allowed it. The routine should have been comforting, a return to normalcy after the surreal interlude in Adrian's world. Instead, it felt hollow, as if she were moving through a faded photograph of her former existence. "You look like hell," Evelyn observed bluntly, sliding into the booth at Rosie's during Celine's break. "And don't tell me it's nothing. You disappear for almost 2 weeks with some vague explanation about a personal matter, then come back looking like someone died." Celine pushed her untouched coffee away. "It's complicated. Complicated has a name, and it's Adrian Blackthorn." Evelyn's expression softened at Celine's startled look. "Please. The whole city's talking about how you saved his life at the gala. Then you vanish, and rumor has it you were staying at Blackthorn Hall." "It wasn't like that," Celine protested weakly. "Then what was it like?" When Celine remained silent, Evelyn reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "You're in love with him, aren't you?" The question hung in the air, demanding an honesty Celine had been avoiding even with herself. Was it love? This ache that followed her through days and kept her awake at night. This constant replay of moments in the music room, of conversations by firelight, of the vulnerability in Adrian's eyes when he thought no one was looking. "It doesn't matter," she finally said. "To him, I was just a complication to be resolved." Evelyn's expression hardened. "He said that. Not to my face." Celine explained about the overheard conversation with Marjorie, Adrian's cold dismissal, the painful goodbye. "He's at war with Victor Hale. He can't afford distractions." "That's bullshit," Evelyn declared with characteristic bluntness. "He's scared. Men like Blackthorn don't know how to handle actual feelings. They'd rather push people away than risk being vulnerable." Before Celine could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it, her blood freezing at the message. "Get out now. Hale knows where you are. Danger imminent." "We need to leave," Celine said, grabbing Evelyn's arm. "Right now." "What? Why?" Evelyn's confusion turned to alarm at Celine's expression. "I'll explain later. Please just trust me." They had barely reached the diner's door when Celine spotted them, 2 men in dark suits across the street, watching the entrance with predatory focus. Not Adrian's security team, who had at least attempted to blend in. These men wanted to be seen, wanted to intimidate. "Back door," Celine whispered, pulling Evelyn toward the kitchen. They slipped out through the service entrance into the alley behind Rosie's. Celine's mind raced. Who had sent the warning text? Adrian. His security team. Whoever it was, she believed the threat was real. "Celine, you're scaring me," Evelyn hissed as they hurried down the alley. "What's happening?" "The man who tried to kill Adrian. I think he's coming after me now." Celine glanced back, relieved to see the alley empty behind them. "We need to get somewhere public, somewhere with cameras and witnesses." They emerged onto a busier street, blending into the pedestrian traffic. Celine's phone buzzed again. Black SUV at the corner. Hale's men. Subway station 2 blocks east. "This way," Celine urged, guiding Evelyn toward the subway entrance. They were halfway there when she spotted the black SUV crawling alongside the curb, keeping pace with them despite the congested traffic. "Run," she said, no longer caring about appearing normal. "Now!" They sprinted toward the subway entrance, dodging startled pedestrians. Celine could hear footsteps behind them, heavy, determined, gaining ground. The subway entrance was just ahead, promising temporary safety in its crowds and cameras. They were 10 feet from the stairs when the explosion ripped through the street behind them. The force threw Celine forward, her ears ringing as she hit the pavement hard. Disoriented, she looked back to see the black SUV engulfed in flames, bystanders screaming and running for cover. Through the chaos, she spotted a familiar silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, moving toward her with single-minded purpose. Adrian. He reached her in seconds, helping her to her feet with gentle urgency. "Are you hurt?" Celine shook her head, still dazed. "Evelyn, your friend is fine. My team has her." Adrian's eyes scanned her face, his expression a mixture of relief and barely contained fury. "We need to move. Now." "What happened?" Celine asked as he guided her toward a waiting car, his body positioned protectively between her and the street. "Hale's men were following you. We intercepted them." The clinical way he described what had clearly been a violent confrontation sent a chill through Celine. This was the Adrian Blackthorne the world feared. Ruthless, dangerous, willing to do whatever necessary to eliminate threats. Inside the car, Evelyn was already waiting, her face pale with shock. Adrian's security chief sat in the front passenger seat, speaking rapidly into a communications device. As soon as Adrian and Celine were inside, the car pulled away from the curb, accelerating smoothly into traffic. "Would someone please explain what the hell is happening?" Evelyn demanded, her voice shaking. Adrian's gaze never left Celine's face. "Victor Hale discovered your connection to me. He decided to use you as leverage." "Leverage for what?" Celine asked, though she already suspected the answer. "To force me to back off the takeover and the investigation into the fire." Adrian's jaw tightened. "He sent a message this morning. Drop everything or he would take from me what I value most." The implication hung in the air between them. What he valued most. After dismissing her as nothing, as a complication to be resolved, Adrian was now suggesting she meant something entirely different to him. "You said I was nothing," Celine reminded him, her voice barely audible over the car's engine. "A temporary complication." Adrian's expression softened, the mask slipping to reveal the man beneath. "I lied." The simple admission cracked something open between them, a door neither had been brave enough to open before. "Sir," the security chief interrupted, "we have a situation at the rendezvous point. Hale's men were waiting. We need an alternate location." Adrian's expression hardened again. "Take us to Blackthorne Hall." "That's the first place they'll look," the security chief protested. "Exactly." Adrian's smile was cold, predatory. "And we'll be ready for them." As the car changed direction, heading toward the outskirts of the city where Blackthorne Hall stood, Celine tried to process the rapid shift in circumstances. An hour ago, she had been serving coffee, trying to forget Adrian Blackthorne. Now she was racing back to his mansion, pursued by men who wanted to use her to destroy him. "I'm sorry," Adrian said quietly, for her ears alone. "I thought by sending you away, I was protecting you. I was wrong." The admission clearly cost him, a man unaccustomed to acknowledging mistakes. Celine studied his profile, the proud line of his jaw, the scars that mapped his survival. "Why did you come for me?" she asked. "After everything you said to your aunt after pushing me away, why risk yourself now?" Adrian turned to her, his storm-gray eyes intense with an emotion she had never seen there before. Raw, unguarded, almost desperate in its honesty. "Because the thought of a world without you in it was unbearable," he said, his voice rough with feeling. "Because every moment since you left has been hollow. Because—" He broke off, struggling with words that didn't come easily to him. "Because what?" Celine pressed, needing to hear it. "Because I love you." The words emerged like they'd been torn from him, painful but necessary. "God help me, Celine, I love you. Not for saving my life, not for seeing past my scars, but for showing me that I'm still capable of feeling something other than rage and vengeance." The confession hung in the air between them, transforming the space inside the speeding car. Evelyn looked away, giving them what privacy she could. The security team kept their eyes forward, pretending not to hear. Before Celine could respond, the car swerved violently. Through the rear window, she saw another vehicle gaining on them. Sleek, black, clearly in pursuit. "They've found us," the driver announced grimly. Adrian's arm went around Celine protectively as the car accelerated, weaving through traffic with dangerous speed. "How far to the hall?" 10 minutes if we can lose them," the security chief replied, drawing a weapon from his shoulder holster. "We won't make it," Adrian said, his tactical mind assessing their options. "Take the tunnel route." The driver nodded, making a sharp turn that threw them against the doors. Behind them, 2 more vehicles had joined the pursuit. "What's the tunnel route?" Celine asked, fear and adrenaline sharpening her senses. "An old service tunnel that runs beneath the river," Adrian explained, his calm at odds with the chaos around them. "It comes out near Blackthorn Hall. Few people know it exists." The car plunged down a ramp that appeared to lead to an abandoned warehouse. Inside, the driver activated something on the dashboard, and a section of wall slid open to reveal a narrow tunnel, dimly lit and barely wide enough for their vehicle. As they entered the tunnel, the wall closed behind them, sealing them off from their pursuers. The sudden quiet was almost disorienting after the frantic chase. "We're safe for now," Adrian said, his arm still around Celine. "But Hale won't stop. Not until he destroys everything I care about." Celine turned to him, finding his face inches from hers in the dim light of the tunnel. "Then we stop him first," she said with a determination that surprised even her. "Together." Something shifted in Adrian's expression. Hope, perhaps, or wonder at finding an ally where he had expected none. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers. "Together," he agreed, the word a promise and a prayer. In the darkness of the tunnel, racing toward an uncertain confrontation, Adrian Blackthorne and Celine Marlowe found something neither had expected in the midst of danger: the courage to love despite the risk, to choose vulnerability over safety, to face whatever came next not alone, but united. The flames of truth had burned away pretense, leaving only what mattered: 2 souls who had found in each other something worth fighting for, worth living for. Blackthorn Hall stood silhouetted against the twilight sky, its Gothic architecture more fortress than home as Adrian's security team established a perimeter around the property. Inside, the mansion hummed with controlled urgency, security personnel checking surveillance feeds, armed guards positioned at strategic points, escape routes prepared should they become necessary. In the midst of this military precision, Celine felt strangely calm. The chaos of the day, the explosion, the car chase, Adrian's confession, had crystallized something within her. Fear remained, but it was overshadowed by a clarity she hadn't expected. Whatever happened next, she was exactly where she needed to be. Evelyn had been escorted to a secure location outside the city, protesting but ultimately understanding the danger. Now Celine stood in Adrian's study, watching as he coordinated with his team, his voice steady as he issued directives. This was Adrian in his element, commanding, strategic, 10 steps ahead of his adversaries. Yet she could see the cost of that control in the tension of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. He had confessed his love for her in a moment of crisis, words torn from him by fear and adrenaline. Now, in the relative safety of Blackthorn Hall, uncertainty hung between them, an unfinished conversation neither seemed ready to resume. When the last security officer left, closing the study door behind him, silence settled over the room. Adrian remained at his desk, staring at surveillance feeds showing the mansion's perimeter, his expression unreadable. "What happens now?" Celine asked, breaking the silence. Adrian looked up, his storm-gray eyes finding hers across the room. "My legal team has delivered the evidence connecting Hale to the fire to the FBI. Combined with today's attack, it should be enough to bring charges against him." "That's not what I meant," Celine said softly. Understanding flickered across his face. He rose from the desk, moving toward the fireplace where flames cast dancing shadows across the room. For a long moment, he stared into the fire, his scarred profile harsh in the golden light. "What I said in the car," he began, his voice low. "I meant it. But I would understand if you... If I what? Celine moved closer, drawn to him despite the careful distance he maintained. If I don't feel the same. If I'm afraid of what loving you might mean. Adrian turned to face her fully, his expression vulnerable in a way she had seen only glimpses of before. Loving me comes with a price, Celine. You've already paid more than you should have. Shouldn't that be my choice? She took another step toward him. You've spent 12 years deciding for everyone else what they can handle, keeping people at a distance, using your scars and your reputation as shields. Maybe it's time to let someone else decide if you're worth the risk. Something shifted in Adrian's eyes, hope warring with the ingrained habit of isolation. And what have you decided? Instead of answering, Celine closed the remaining distance between them. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, she reached up to touch his face, not the unmarked right side, but the left where fire had rewritten his features. Her fingers traced the ridged tissue with gentle exploration, mapping the geography of his survival. Adrian went very still under her touch, his breathing shallow. No one touched his scars. It was an unspoken rule in his world, a boundary no one dared cross. What do you see? He asked, his voice barely audible. When you look at this. The question held years of pain, of seeing revulsion or pity in others' eyes. I see strength, Celine answered honestly. I see a boy who walked through fire and emerged a man determined never to be vulnerable again. Her fingers continued their gentle exploration, finding the place where scar tissue met smooth skin at his jaw. But mostly I see you, Adrian. Not your wealth or your power or even your past. Just you. Adrian's eyes closed briefly at her words, as if they caused physical pain. When he opened them again, they shone with an emotion too raw to name. There's more, he said, the words seeming to cost him greatly. Scars you haven't seen. Celine understood what he was offering, not just a physical revelation but a complete vulnerability he had allowed no one since the fire. Show me, she said softly. With hands that trembled slightly, the feared, untouchable Adrian Blackthorne trembling. He loosened his tie and began unbuttoning his shirt. Each movement was deliberate, almost ceremonial in its gravity. When he finally let the shirt fall open, Celine couldn't suppress a small gasp. The scars didn't end at his neck as she had assumed. They continued down his left shoulder and chest, a tapestry of healed burns that covered nearly a third of his torso. Some areas were smooth and shiny, others textured with ridges and valleys where the damage had been deepest. They told a story of unimaginable pain, of surgeries and skin grafts, of a recovery that must have been excruciating in both body and spirit. Now you see, Adrian said, his voice rough with emotion, what fire leaves behind. Celine met his gaze steadily, refusing to look away from his vulnerability. Your scars don't frighten me, Adrian. They tell the story of a man who lived through fire. She placed her palm gently against his chest, feeling his heartbeat strong and rapid beneath the damaged skin. They're proof of your survival, not reasons to hide from life. Something broke in Adrian's expression, a dam holding back 12 years of isolation and loneliness. He pulled her to him with sudden urgency, his arms encircling her as if she might disappear. Celine held him just as tightly, feeling the tremors that ran through his powerful frame. I never thought, he whispered against her hair, that anyone could look at me, really look, and not turn away. I'm not turning away, Celine promised, her voice muffled against his chest. Not now, not ever. When he finally loosened his hold enough to look down at her, Adrian's expression had transformed. The mask was gone completely, revealing a tenderness she had glimpsed only in fragments before. When he listened to her play, when he spoke of his mother, when he confessed his love in the speeding car. I've spent 12 years building walls, he said, his voice rough with emotion, keeping everyone at a distance, using fear as a weapon and isolation as armor. I convinced myself it was strength. His hand came up to cup her cheek. Then you walked into my life and saw straight through every defense I'd constructed. Not everyone wants to hurt you, Adrian, Celine said softly. Some of us just want to love you." The word hung between them, an offering and a question. Adrian's response was to lower his head slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When their lips finally met, the kiss was gentle at first, tentative, questioning, then deepening with a hunger that had been building since that night in the music room. Celine felt herself melting into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair as his arms tightened around her waist. There was healing in this connection, a promise of something neither had dared hope for, not just passion but partnership, not just desire but understanding. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd feel this again," he confessed. "This, alive." "Neither did I," Celine admitted. "My life before you was safe, but it was small. I played music that spoke of emotions I'd never fully experienced." She smiled up at him. "Now I understand what I was trying to say all along." Adrian's answering smile transformed his face, softening the harsh lines, making him startlingly handsome despite, or perhaps because of, the scars that told his story. In that moment, he wasn't the feared billionaire or the scarred recluse, but simply a man allowing himself to love and be loved in return. "Whatever happens with Hale," he said, his voice low and fervent, "whatever comes next, I want to face it with you. Not because I need to protect you, but because I'm stronger with you than I ever was alone." The admission, from a man who had built an empire on self-reliance, was perhaps the greatest gift he could offer. Celine reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at how this scarred, complex man had become essential to her in so short a time. "Then we face it together," she promised. "Past the scars, past the fear, whatever comes, we face it together." Outside Blackthorn Hall, danger still lurked. Victor Hale remained a threat, his vengeance temporarily thwarted but not defeated. The battle for justice and truth was far from over. But inside, in the firelit study where two wounded souls had found healing in each other's arms, a different truth had already prevailed. That love, when brave enough to see past scars both visible and hidden, could rebuild what fire had destroyed. Dawn broke over Manhattan, painting the skyline in hues of gold and rose. From the windows of Blackthorn Hall, the city appeared peaceful, giving no indication of the storm that had broken overnight. Victor Hale had been arrested at 3 a.m., a coordinated operation between the FBI and Adrian's security team. The evidence connecting him to both the recent attacks and the 12-year-old fire that had claimed the Blackthorn family was damning. Financial records, witness testimonies that had finally surfaced, and Hale's own desperate attempts to silence Adrian had created a case too strong to ignore or bury. Celine stood beside Adrian as they watched the morning news report the arrest. His face remained impassive, but she felt the slight tremor in his hand when it sought hers, the only outward sign of the emotional earthquake happening within him. 12 years, he said quietly. 12 years of nightmares, of wondering if I'd ever know the truth, of building walls to ensure no one could hurt me again. He turned to her, his storm-gray eyes clear in the morning light. "And now you begin again," Celine said, squeezing his hand. "Not forgetting the past, but not imprisoned by it either." The next weeks unfolded with a surreal quality, as if the world around them was realigning itself to accommodate this new reality. Victor Hale's empire crumbled as investigations revealed decades of corruption and manipulation. The business world that had feared Adrian Blackthorn now watched in fascination as he systematically dismantled the walls he had built around himself and his company. First came the press conference, Adrian standing before a forest of microphones, his scarred face fully visible under the harsh lights as he spoke not just of Hale's crimes but of his own journey from survivor to recluse to a man rediscovering his humanity. "For too long, I used fear as a weapon and isolation as armor," he told the assembled reporters, his voice steady despite the personal nature of his words. "I believed vulnerability was weakness. I was wrong." Celine watched from the sidelines, her heart swelling with pride at his courage. This was not the cold, untouchable billionaire who had entered the ballroom that fateful night. This was a man stepping into the light, scars and all. The business world's reaction was mixed. Some analysts predicted disaster, claiming Adrian had sacrificed the intimidation factor that had made Blackthorn Enterprises so formidable. Others recognized the strategic brilliance of humanizing both himself and his company in the wake of Hale's disgrace. What no one predicted was how the public would respond to this transformation. The story captured the city's imagination: the scarred billionaire and the pianist who had saved more than just his life. Interview requests flooded in. Most declined, but a select few granted. A profile in The New Yorker dubbed them Beauty and the CEO, a title that made Adrian roll his eyes but secretly amused him. "They're missing the point entirely," he told Celine one evening as they sat in the music room, where she still played for him each night. "They think it's about you seeing past my scars. They don't understand that you saw past everything: the wealth, the power, the reputation. You saw me when I'd forgotten who that even was." Celine's fingers continued moving over the keys, playing a melody that had been forming in her mind for weeks, something that spoke of transformation and rebirth. "People love simple narratives," she said. "The truth is always more complex." And complex it was. Their relationship wasn't without challenges. Adrian's instinct to control, to protect at all costs, didn't disappear overnight. Celine's fierce independence sometimes clashed with his desire to give her everything. They argued, they compromised, they learned each other's boundaries and triggers. But through it all, something beautiful was taking shape, not just between them but within Adrian himself. The man who had used fear as his primary tool now sought different ways to lead. The executive who had kept everyone at arm's length now knew his employees' names, their families, their aspirations. 6 months after Victor Hale's arrest, Adrian stood in his office, looking out at the city that had once whispered his name in fear. Behind him, the door opened quietly. "The board is waiting," his assistant said, her tone warmer than it would have been a year ago. "And Ms. Marlowe has arrived for the foundation meeting." Adrian nodded, straightening his tie. The Blackthorn Foundation had been his mother's passion before the fire, a philanthropic organization that had languished under Marjorie's cold stewardship. Now, with Celine's involvement, it was being revitalized, focusing on music education for underprivileged children and burn recovery programs. In the boardroom, Celine was already seated, engaged in animated conversation with several board members. She looked up when Adrian entered, her smile transforming her face. She belonged here now, not as an employee or an ornament, but as his partner in every sense. The meeting proceeded with the efficient harmony that had become the hallmark of the new Blackthorn Enterprises. When it concluded, Adrian and Celine walked together to the elevator, their professional demeanor giving way to more personal warmth once the doors closed. "Dinner tonight?" he asked, his hand finding hers. "There's something I want to discuss with you." Celine raised an eyebrow. "Sounds mysterious." "Perhaps." His smile, once so rare, now a sight that still made her heart skip, held a secret she couldn't decipher. That evening, Adrian took her not to one of Manhattan's exclusive restaurants but to the rooftop garden of Blackthorn Tower, a space transformed with twinkling lights, flowering plants, and in the center, a small table set for two. A piano had been placed nearby, gleaming in the soft lighting. "What is all this?" Celine asked, taking in the romantic setting with wonder. Adrian led her to the table, uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted privacy for this conversation." They dined under the stars, talking of the foundation's progress, of the music school Celine was establishing with Adrian's support, of the future stretching before them, bright with possibilities neither had imagined a year ago. After dessert, Adrian rose, extending his hand. "Play something for me." Celine moved to the piano, settling on the bench as Adrian stood beside the instrument, watching her with an intensity that still made her breath catch. She began to play, not a classical piece, but the composition she had been working on for months, the one that told their story in notes and harmonies. As the final notes faded into the night air, Adrian knelt beside the piano bench, taking her hands in his. "A year ago, I was a man who had forgotten how to live," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I had survived the fire, but I wasn't truly alive. I used my scars as an excuse to keep the world at a distance. He brought her hands to his lips, kissing them gently. Then you played Chopin in my ballroom, and something inside me that had been silent for 12 years began to stir. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. You didn't just save my life that night, Celine. You gave me back my soul. He opened the box, revealing a ring of stunning simplicity and elegance. I'm asking you to continue that miracle, to build a life with me, to face whatever comes next together. Tears blurred Celine's vision as she looked from the ring to Adrian's face, the scars now as familiar and beloved as every other part of him. Yes, she whispered, her voice breaking with joy. Yes, Adrian. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Celine saw in his eyes not the feared billionaire everyone had whispered about, not the scarred recluse who kept the world at bay, but simply the man she loved, complex, imperfect, and more beautiful for having survived his fires. Later, as they stood at the rooftop's edge, looking out over the city that had witnessed their unlikely journey, Adrian's arm around her waist, Celine thought about the path that had brought them here. From a pianist hired to provide background music to the woman who had seen past every defense to find the soul behind the scars. What are you thinking? Adrian asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. That true love doesn't erase our scars, she said, leaning into his embrace. It gives them meaning, makes them part of a larger story. Adrian's arms tightened around her. Our story. Just beginning, she agreed, turning in his arms to face the man who had once been feared by all but was now truly seen by one, and found that being seen, being known completely, was the greatest freedom he had ever known. In the city below, lights twinkled like earthbound stars. Above, the real stars witnessed the miracle that happens when fear gives way to love, when walls crumble to reveal the soul within, when two people find in each other not perfection, but perfect acceptance. Hello, my beautiful souls. As our story finds its resolution, I'm sitting here with a full heart, thinking of each of you. Isn't it remarkable how love can transform a fortress into a sanctuary? I wonder about the walls in your own life, the defenses you've built, the scars you hide, the parts of yourself you've kept protected from the world. Life rarely follows the paths we imagine, does it? Whether you're currently walking through shadows like Adrian once did, or learning to see past someone else's defenses like Celine, know that you're not alone on the journey. True connection isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who sees your soul behind your walls and chooses to stay. If this story touched something in your heart tonight, please share it with someone whose soul might need its message. Tap that subscribe button to join our family of hopeful hearts and romantic spirits. I create these stories because your emotions and experiences matter deeply to me. Until we meet again in our next chapter, remember that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin when we're brave enough to be seen, scars, imperfections, and all. Because in the end, it's not about finding someone who can't see your flaws. It's about finding someone who sees them and loves you not despite them, but because they're part of the masterpiece that is uniquely you.